All right, welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is Racial Violence in the Early 1900s in the United States. We're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you read more about this very difficult topic and this very troubling topic, it's good to center in on these to start to get a sense of really truly how complex and how troubling it really is. So, the first term for us is Jim Crow. Now, Jim Crow as a term, comes out of minstrelsy in the first half of the 1800s, but by the second half of the 1800s, comes to define a rigid system of racialized segregation that is enforced throughout the United States, not just in the American South, and especially so in the aftermath of the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which the Supreme Court decides in the early 1890s. Fairly famously, it articulates that separate but equal doctrine, and behaviors and institutions and state and local resources are devoted towards a rigid enforcement of a white supremacist doctrine, again, both in the former Confederacy and in some cases, of course, in other parts of the United States. Now, Jim Crow, of course, is about institutional power, it's about racial power, it's about maintaining a racialized status quo. And that brings us to our second point, which is lynching. Now, lynchings were a part of the 19th and the 20th century in American life. The idea of mobs carrying out vigilante, often racialized, violent actions, commonly against Black Americans, but others were targets, but of course Black Americans are the primary target here in many cases. Many are accused, threatened, suggested to be guilty of a wide variety of forms of crimes, from murder to sexual assault, or simply not according oneself to the structures of localized Jim Crow. Often, when it comes to these forms of lynching, before the individual is, or after they are killed, commonly the white community in the area might take photos of the incident, pridefully, sort of showing themselves off, and postcards would be made of those photos. Again, a form of Jim Crow maintenance and material culture, right? Sort of reinforcing on the part of a white community the pride within conducting that kind of violence. An example or a name for us to remember, because many thousands of Black Americans were lynched in the second half of the 19th century and in the first decades of the 20th century, a name would be Laura Nelson. Laura Nelson was a young Black woman, a mother, who was married and accused of killing a sheriff in Oklahoma, or a sheriff's deputy. She is eventually lynched by a mob of white individuals, not before being gang raped as well. This brings us to our third term, which is Wilmington, North Carolina. So, throughout the second half of the 19th century and through the first decades of the 20th century, there are active attempts on the part of mobs, local authorities, and others to rigidly reinforce racialized white supremacist norms. And this can include mob rule efforts and attacks against Black Americans. There are many of these. An example of this occurs in Wilmington, North Carolina, in November of 1898. In the 1890s in America, there had been a depression, a very, very big depression, and there was a coalition locally in Wilmington of the local black community, as well as some progressive white individuals who had attempted to kind of, join together politically. And this was something that a radical sort of political contingent of pro-white supremacists had a problem with. And so they stage an insurrection in November of 1898. They force the mayor to resign at gunpoint. They begin a process of attacking the local black business district and targeting black individuals in the street, forcing them to flee, killing a number of them. So the attack in Wilmington has a number of names: the Wilmington Massacre, the Wilmington Insurrection, but this is one of many examples. Another example of these forms of ritual public violence on the part of largely white communities against the presence of black individuals in that space would be Atlanta in 1906. So there is a mob action against black Americans in Atlanta, Georgia. It begins on September 22nd, goes for about a day or two. Local newspapers had published stories accusing black Americans of committing sexual assaults against young white women. And by that evening, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of white individuals looking to carry out ritual attacks against black communities, and they do. A fifth term for us is going to be Springfield, Illinois. There is a similar style of violent attack that occurs against Springfield's black community in 1908. A young white woman who's married accused an individual of committing a sexual assault against her. A young black man is blamed for this, and you see a mob form and begin a process of attacking two separate business districts and neighborhoods for black Americans in Springfield. A number of black individuals are killed. The number in terms of black Americans who are killed in this, we don't fully know the number, partly because they force so many and deport so many from the state capital, and a number of fires occur and houses are burned and individuals pass away in those houses, that kind of thing. So it's pretty terrible. All right. Thank you very much.